I want to tell you about two really good middle grade books that I have recently read, which are written by Indigenous American authors and feature Indigenous American characters. The first of these books is called I Can Make This Promise, and it is by Christine Day, who is from the Upper Skagit Nation. This is the story of 12-year-old Edie, who is a biracial girl who lives in Seattle. Her father is white and her mother is Native American, but was adopted by white parents and so doesn't know much about where she came from. Edie's mother has always told her that she didn't know who her real parents were. She didn't know what tribe she came from, and Edie has accepted this, but is also not always comfortable with it. She would like to know more about who she is. Edie is very interested in film and filmmaking, and she has a project to do with her two best friends. One day, while doing research for this project, they are in Edie's attic and they come across a box of photos, and they find a picture of a woman who looks exactly like Edie. There are also letters in this box, so Edie and her friends start reading the letters and they find out that this woman was also named Edie. So Edie sets out to find the truth about who this woman was and why she has the same name as her Edie and why she looks exactly like her. But she doesn't want to ask her parents directly. So she and her friends sort of start to investigate this. Through her research, Edie starts to become more aware of the misrepresentation of Native Americans in film. She's always studied film, and this is brought to light for her. And she also becomes aware of the activism in the American Indian movement. Edie matures through the process of searching for her identity, and she realizes finally the reason why her parents decided to keep family connections a secret for so long. This book gets into some real history. It talks about the Indian Child Welfare Act of 1978. This was a very important law for Indigenous Americans. It was a federal law that governed the removal and out-of-home placement of Native American children from their families. Before this, Native children were being removed from their homes and placed in foster care and adoptive homes without permission from their parents. So this is a very difficult history that this book gets into, but it's really important that it's included here because it's a history that more people should know about. This book is beautifully written and was difficult to put down. I really liked Edie. She was a strong character and she was determined to find out the truth. So I recommend I Can Make This Promise by Christine Day. The second book that I want to tell you about today is this book called Res Dogs by Joseph Bruchac. Joseph Bruchac is Abenaki, and he is a very prolific writer. He has written a lot of books, fiction and nonfiction. This book, Res Dogs, is written in verse, and it takes place during the pandemic. So it is a very recent book and a very interesting take on that. It is about a girl named Melian, and she's a Pennacook girl from Boston. She is visiting her grandparents on their Pennacook reservation when all of a sudden everyone has to shelter in place. So she has to extend her winter vacation with her grandparents and stay there. She can't go home to Boston where her parents are. And they are visited by a mysterious dog. It's a big dog with 2 white spots over his eyes and just shows up at her grandparents' house on the reservation. And Four-Eyed Dog is what her grandmother calls him. They name him Malsum, which means wolf in Pennacook. And he makes himself at home, but he never comes in the house. And he has a sort of magical quality to him. He is definitely a dog of the reservation. He sort of just appeared out of nowhere. He's a true res dog. Melian's grandfather tells her, the dogs on any reservation, they live their own lives, they have their own tribes, and when we would travel, like when in the spring, we used to go and live by the falls where the fish were running. Lots of times the dogs would not go with us. They'd stay in the village and take care of themselves. And that's his explanation for why Malsum has showed up to visit them. Melian misses her parents a lot, and she has a hard time with school. There is not a very strong internet connection or a reliable connection on the reservation. So she has to miss school a lot. And it's interesting to read about this in a book when it's just so recently been something that has been happening. So instead of connecting with her peers and with her, she FaceTimes with her parents when she can, but she is entertained by the stories from her grandparents, not unlike that little story that her grandfather told her about dogs. And even though she has heard some of these stories before, they start to have a new meaning for her. Other elders in the reservation, besides her grandmother and her grandfather, also share stories and wisdom and their customs with her. And this book does a wonderful job of weaving those stories seamlessly into the verse. So we are getting Melian's lockdown experience, but we're also getting this family history and the stories of some atrocities that happened to Native nations. Because Melian is a visitor to the reservation, her point of view is very interesting for us because she's absorbing all this information in a new way, and she's getting details about history and about customs, and then sharing them with the reader. So it comes across very authentically. The book is packed with information, and Melian takes this information and she creates a school presentation out of it. So one of the parts that I really loved about this book was the story of the dog, and there are some myths and stories that are shared about dogs in general. And the relationship that Melian has with Malsum is very special. So if you want a really moving and informative book that is written in verse, I would recommend that you try Res Dogs by Joseph Bruchac.